that need to be solved. It's very difficult. I don't think the way, especially the connection tracking is expressed, is an acceptable way. I mean, the standard body of P4 is going in a different direction, and is on the, hopefully is on the call, but for sure Mario is on the call. They can comment. I would like personally to see something that is much more aligned with the PNA and much more aligned with where the P4 community is going, and that is not completely proprietary to this project. Gerard also expressed in the last point performance issue and whatever. I think that from a performance issue, the way P4 group is going, the way P4 the PNA is going, is absolutely perfect and is much more aligned to achieving our performance goal. So I think that is an important transformation that needs to happen sooner than later.
That is great. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add that I started working on a alternative implementation of connection tracking, which is compliant with PNA. In PNA, there are constructs for adding flows to a flow table. So I'm working on that, and hopefully I'll be able to post it soon on the GitHub.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you.
Hey Mario, is there a simulation target for that available? Is there a BMV2 or similar for PNA?
Well, not yet, but I think there is work going on in having the PDK based environment that can compile, on which we can run PNA compliant P4 code. I think Andy might know more about these.
So I can't publish. I don't know off the top of my head any dates I can publish, but I know that there are at least some Intel engineers being paid, part of their salaries to get the DPDK backend to be able to compile PNA programs and run them. I don't have a release date to announce.
Yes, as Andy was just mentioning, we have a P4 DPDK work that's going on within Intel, and then that would be based on the PNA PSA architecture. I think it's drifting towards PNA at this time, and yeah, we're trying to bring up Sonic together with P4 DPDK. That's an effort also that is going on. I think Andy has put in some comments here. Basically, it would be good to have the exact definitions of the new constructs that have been added in the BMV2 based the P4 that is being extended to add some of these new functionalities. Those definitions, once they're clearer, we can see whether it is already supported or how we can extend that in PSA PNA if needed, and would like to also hear more from Mario.
What Mario said earlier was, it sounds like, I'll let Mario correct, but he's in the progress of hand translating the code, the reference model code, to something that would compile on a PNA target.
Mario, some more information would be good from your side.
Yeah. I'm just trying to write the connection tracking, the same kind of logic that is currently implemented with the that graph construct that is not part of P4 right now. Write it using the add-on miss that we have defined in the PNA to create a flow table, add flows, and obviously handle them differently, whether it's a first packet or not, like the current code is doing, but in a way that's following the current PNA extensions.
And if you find any gaps or issues or questions there, Mario, feel free to drop me a line.
How about match kinds? How about the new match kinds? Sorry. Any consideration for the new match kinds? Do those need to be defined in the architecture, or is there some other way to handle them?
If I understand correctly, one way to handle them is to turn them all into either like ternary or range or LPM, and then the lists become expanded via cross product in the control plane.
Right. Just
which for a reference, which for a real implementation might not be very efficient, but for small enough test cases in a reference model might be good enough. If we're just talking about testing purposes only. But others may have other plans or thoughts on that too. But that's my understanding, is what their meaning effectively can be defined by a cross-producting of entries.
Yeah, it would be good to know what the motivation was for putting those in the first place. Was it just to simplify expressing use cases, or is it actually an implementation?
I've worked on an implementation of this at Cisco some years back that John Carney taught me how to do this efficiently in the data plane, and he's been on the call. And there are more efficient data plane ways to do it than the cross-producting, but they're not simple in the general case. And so I think what they were going for is something that, an implementation would be free to put in that more efficient implementation without having to reverse engineer it from the cross product. Like having a control plane stick in a cross product and then having a driver figure out that the controller added the cross product and then reverse engineer that is really, really tough and counterproductive. But if the controller could say, here's a list of source IP prefixes, here's a list of des IP prefixes, here's a list of source port ranges, here's a list of des port ranges, and you have the right kind of driver and hardware, you can implement there very efficiently without having to do the cross product ever.
Gerald, what do you think that? Is that feedback we should take back to engineering there?
Sorry, there's people on this call. I'm not hearing them speak up at all. Prince is on this call. We have Liat on this call, and there's others, Ezra, other people on this call. So I'm in listening mode because I want the community to decide how to move forward.
Okay.
But I would like to listen to others speak on this because it is super important. I mean, I don't want to be here a month from now talking about what we're going to do. I'm going to be doing it. So, Prince, are you on this call? What is your thoughts on this? I can see Prince, but he's on mute. How about Liat?
There he is. Yeah.
I'm here, but I frankly, I cannot give you my opinion right now because I need to read all of that and I didn't complete the reading, so I don't know what to say right now.
Yeah, they're really talking about the language that we're going to describe this in more than anything than the actual act of writing this stuff. So really talking about using P4 and P and A, which I am not an expert on. I don't know what the difference between P4 and P&A is, so somebody would have to explain that.
So Andy, P&A is just, it's the group similar to PSA, right? That works with the NIC?
I mean, this is not a complete, this is a rough analogy, but it's not too far off. I mean, there's a C language specification, and at least, well, maybe it's probably not true now, but at least originally C was defined separately from like the standard IO and standard library. I think maybe now they're combined together in the specs, but so I may be talking ancient history. P4, there's a base language which defines, match kinds like LPM, ternary, and exact, but it doesn't define list or range list. And so, but sometimes architectures are sort of like a standard library that can be built on top of the language, tuned for targets like a NIC or a switch. And one of the things they define is extra match kinds or extra function calls, standard library function calls you can add to them. And so the current P4 reference code uses things that aren't defined in any public P4 architecture or library yet.
Is that what P&A is trying to resolve, to get them into the public libraries? What is P&A?
P&A is the portable NIC architecture, which is basically, some extra library, a small extra library of stuff that seem useful for NIC applications written in P4. And today they don't include some of the things that are in this reference code.
Okay, well
nobody's proposed to add them there.
Okay.
And the working groups are down, I believe, at the bottom here, which is PNA, PSA, da.
So what is the proposal here? At the beginning of the meeting, we had somebody saying that P4 is not the right language. And then we have a bunch of people saying it is. So like, what are we trying to solve here? I think it was Silvano that was saying was at the beginning of the call that this was the wrong.
No. P4 is the right language and PNA is the right library for me. What I don't like is the extension that are present today in the connection tracking model that is posted on GitHub. That extension go in a different direction of PNA, are proprietary, and I would like them to be removed and replaced with the extension or the library that PNA define.
Okay, so we should stick to that because I believe that the P4, the first version, the draft version, was written by Mellanox. There's Mellanox people on the call here. I don't have a problem, and I don't even think Mellanox would have a problem writing it in such a way that we could include libraries that are more likely to be public. So why don't we have somebody from Mellanox talk here? Maybe if this is the only issue, maybe this is easy to resolve.
The reason I think that what the person that needs to reply for that is the one that who did it, and I think it's Marian, and he's not on the call today.
Yeah.
That's why we're not getting that attention in the discussion.
Yeah. So
out this week.
Okay, so I would suggest then that I don't think this is a hot, contentious issue as maybe people think. So why don't we, Christina, get just Marian and a couple of key people here who want to talk about it, figure that out in the background before the next meeting. It seems like logical to me. I mean, I don't think Mellanox is wed to one way or the other, right? No. And we want others to start contributing to that behavioral model because we know the behavioral model doesn't cover everything. It doesn't cover the acts. It doesn't cover flags. We don't know if I could, I don't know if I could fuzz that model. You know, there's a lot of things in the model that are probably missing. And where we want to be moving to is taking agreeing on how we're going to approach that and then adding to the model the things that are missing. And a lot of the things that might be missing are the things that we didn't put in our document because we assumed, you know, that you know, fuzzing is about, you know, enter some malformed packets and see what happens because it should still survive that. But we don't put that in our document. And so the behavioral model is like is kind of almost just describing kind of what's in the documents without taking into consideration. We're assuming that you know, the people working on this in the data path actually know what data paths are supposed to do. So I want to get to that point. Now, I don't want you guys to think that the P4 behavioral model that was proposed is final. It was, and we've said that several times, it was a draft to get something out. Let's figure out if we can move towards a library that people can agree upon. If we can do that, then we can get on to the real work, which is let's finish that behavioral model for VNet.
I agree with that. I recommend that, you know, in addition to the Mellanox person who wrote the model, probably the two persons that need to be in that meeting are Mario Baldi and Andy, and then of course anybody else who want to contribute. But that are the other two people.
Yeah, so you can do it through emails, guys. You know, in the background, and if you can agree, then it'd be easy. We can just meet and say, here's what we think that we've agreed to. Does the rest of the community agree? And as long as we agree, then we move on. And because we've talked about it a little bit, I think it sounds like something that's resolvable.
Is there a way to not just make a comment here in connection tracking so it's in front of everybody?
Now, this is a major change. I mean, Mario can repost everything if you want.
Yeah, I was planning to just post a pull request with a new version of the contract file, and then anyone can check what's the difference. And you know, and whatever I will post is not going to be necessarily fully comprehensive and correct. I mean, it's just the first version, and then we can if people like it, we can work with that and improve it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
sounds good. Sounds good. I think we're on the right track then. So, Baldy, you're going to do that? When do you think you can have a first version that people can look at and?
Well, I don't know. In the next few days, maybe beginning next week, in the worst.
Oh, that's fine. That's
And
great.
Marian did want to come, but he had a prior appointment today. He had already, he came last week. He gave us a great explanation and kind of threw out what he was trying to do. And I believe he'll come back, but it was just this week he couldn't.
And that's fine.
Yeah. So that
And
would be.
from last week's discussions with Marian, he was also of the opinion that okay, yeah, this is actually deviates from the standard, and then he's open to getting this one back into if there are any support through the PNA that can actually serve the actual use case, then he's open to basically getting this thing. So I think it's a good starting point, and then thanks Mario for driving this thing to bring in as much as possible to the PNA specifications, so that we can all use those libraries and then be able to really generate the behavior model on which we can test these APIs.
Yeah, I think just to go back and reiterate, we'll need a way to execute this too, right?
Yep. So Marian did say that he was willing to upload the tool as soon as he had made a few fixes.
No, I don't think he said that. I think he said that he was willing to upload the tool to do to generate the API, not the tool to do the simulation.
Oh,
that's right. That's
okay.
right. That was a secondary exercise.
Yeah, that was a PSI header generation. That's
Okay,
kind of a nice to have.
Which is nice to have.
Yeah, it's nice to have. So we have single source of truth, but the P4 code will be nice to have, but it's only really useful if we can execute it and verify that it does what we think it should do, right? And that means.
But my understanding is that Intel is willing to post that code.
Yeah, I'm just sort of coming back to that. There's an undefined schedule and plan there, and I'm not trying to pin anyone down, but at some point we'll need to have some kind of an idea of when these things might emerge, right?
Like I can double check within my Intel context and report back if there is a schedule they're willing to publish.
Yeah, like even down to the resolution of which quarter next year. I mean, assuming that's the time frame. And I'm just wondering, Reshma, is this going to be in any way related to the IPDK program, or like as an exemplar project, or is it something else entirely?
Chris, are we talking about P4DPDK?
Yes, and a reference model for PNA.
Yeah, so P4DPDK is a project that could be included under IPDK, and it is in progress. And we are also trying to, have a Sonic on server, a switch that will use the P4DPDK. So that is work in progress. We have a preliminary version of P4DPDK. I'm going to double check if it's already published or if it is not yet, and get back next week, on a time frame.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that. I mean, I've even downloaded the IPDK and built it. It's
Okay.
like I've talked to Dan about that, Dan Daly,
Okay.
etc. And that's going well. But I think what's important is to say that's probably not using the PNA model, or I don't know if it's using, for example, V1 model or PSA. We need to know which architecture, because there's probably at least a few that are relevant these days.
Yeah, one thing I can mention is that definitely it will not use the V1 model. It will definitely be, PSA, PNA, and drifting towards PNA. I think we can conclude going forward within Intel that we will use PNA for P4DPDK. But at the moment, it is very preliminary. The base version of just layer 3 forwarding is all that is supported in P4DPDK. And it has been containerized, and that's the code that is published under ipdk.io. So we will be adding more functionality to it and extending the P4 program. As you are aware of the other project called PINS. PINS uses the psi.p4 and has been upstream now to Sonic as of as of right now, the last week's release.
Right.
Yes, the pins P4 SDN framework within Sonic, that portion has
Hey,
been upstream.
Reshma and Chris, I don't know about others, but what is IPDK? Sorry about not knowing what it is.
And then, Hanif, actually, I want to echo that. I think there is a lot of assumption here that everyone knows about, PNA and IPDK and pins and everything, and which I'm not. I'm now struggling to figure out what these names are. Does it make sense to give, someone who is familiar with these things an intro into these things? One particular confusion I have is the PNA seem to be defining a portable architecture for the NIC. Does that mean the pipeline is going to be different from the SDN transformations that are defined within the dash? How are these things connected?
So for PNA, I can say, so like I say, the analogy is PNA is sort of like your C standard library of a few functions that are useful for many different data plane applications. Your P4 program still defines the data plane applications. Do you have an IPv4 lookup table or not? Do you have a MAC table lookup or not? Those kind of things are completely optional. PNA doesn't mandate any of those. So you can have P4 programs that do wildly different things using the PNA library.
I see.
Yeah, and IPDK, Hanif, is infrastructure platform development kit that Intel has come up with at this time. What I was at the moment, the P4DPDK container that I mentioned has been published in the ipdk.io. That's the only new variable here, IPDK. But pins, I think everybody is aware of. Suresh, actually, pins went through a lot of HLD reviews within Sonic community, and it stands for P4 Integrated Network Stack, using P4 controller-based management of software switch and SDN management of software objects, SI objects. With P4DPDK, and when I mentioned Sonic with P4DPDK, what I was referring is that if we use pins with Sonic with P4DPDK, we will have the P4 interface and the P4RT container also that has been upstream at this point, which can take the user-facing P4 into the soft switch, which uses P4DPDK underneath.
So in this picture that I'm seeing right here, so for any smart NIC is, you could actually replace IPU target with any DPU or so to speak.
Yes, that is the goal. I think details will be published at some point soon.
There probably will be a community event next year on this.
Next year, February, yeah.
We may participate.
If it's not already obvious, IPDK is an Intel product and it will not support. There's no plans to support Mellanox NICs, as far as I know. For example, it's Intel NICs and
Andy, I think
I could be wrong there.
That's something we can discuss internally, but as on the ipdk.io, what Hanif is pointing out is this third line here, right? That says that infrastructure offload and management that runs on CPU, IPU, DPU, and all that. So yeah.
Yeah, if it is like vendor agnostic framework, then why is it only Intel? Or if it is Intel only, then we shouldn't be saying it's a vendor agnostic, right? So
yeah,
I think
is
you
not
have
going to be Intel only. It is the plan is for it to be community based as well, and more. I think there will be a separate community. There was one community meeting that was done earlier, sometime in November. The recording is there. For that meeting, but a community event as a developer conference or something like that of that sort is planned currently for 2022, early 2022, probably in February.
So
yeah,
can I
ask
you is because this seems like Intel centric, but can this be used to simulate whatever we come up with on anybody's hardware? Obviously, you can simulate the high level in software, right? And in fact, we want that. We want to be able to generate software versions of what we're doing so that we have something to test against. It seems like we could use this. You could, well, that's what I'm not sure about. If we use P4 to develop the behavioral model, can we eventually come up with the IPDK equivalent software model so that we can use that to test against all the variations of hardware? Is that possible, or is this doing something different?
That's definitely possible, and we can discuss that more in detail offline as well.
Because you were talking about earlier, the pins seems to be more about how to orchestrate things, and
Yes.
what we're talking about here is the data path.
Yeah, this IPDK is mostly the data path, and pins is the part that what I was referring to was the P4 DPDK portion. If we take that with sonic pins, and then we have a soft switch that can take the user P4, and there is an interface there, P4 RT, to get the compiled P4 objects passed to Sonic, and then using P4 DPDK as the backend for the soft switch.
Yeah, Gerald, I'll give you.
I think IPDK requires that your data plane implementation be P4, and that might be the case for the behavioral model, but it's not going to be the case for everybody's, proprietary.
I would say it's not the case for over half the market, right? So we can't lock ourselves into something that drives the market to P4 only, because if that's the case, then we just drop 60% of the market, and that's not willing to do.
Yeah, we're not mandating anything about the P4 in the backend, just the soft switch, the DPDK usage of in the soft switch, and using pins from Sonic side to use the DPDK, basically.
Yeah. So I would suggest that, for this discussion, guys, if we focus on PNA only for the time being, and then say, okay, how can we get the PNA support from Intel with all the tools? Once we have our models to be compliant with PNA, as Mario is working towards to ensure that, okay, there are no more deviations, and then we have these PNA tools, and then we have the behavior model, and then that will actually help us do, A, we have tools to generate APIs, and B, tools to basically generate the backend behavior model, so that we can at least, validate our objective of testing it out, as opposed to really drifting into, something that is still a work in progress. That's just my, suggestion. Right?
Yeah, and we'll be able to write test cases against that DPDK model, for example.
Correct.
And have a reference architecture, reference test cases, like in the lower left of that diagram, right? It won't be BMV2 though; it would replace that with something else, right? In the lower left, that simulator, probably going to be DPDK or something, right?
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Which sounds reasonable, by the way. to me, we have to have a software version of this, and it sounds reasonable. Can somebody write this down so we don't go like in a million different directions? That sounds like the direction that we've been talking about up till now. So if we maybe just focus on that to get that resolved by next week, hopefully. Christina, can you work with somebody to write down exactly what we're talking about here? It does sound reasonable that if we move to a PNA environment and make sure that we're compliant to that we get a bunch of freebies out of it. Mellanox is still willing to write the tool to turn the P4 model into a SCI API, and what we're getting out of it, if we go that direction, is that the ability to generate a software version of all of this, such that the testers can actually write tests now or soon, and start without having any hardware.
And the idea is that the reference model doesn't restrict the implementations that want to test against the compliance suite in any way. They don't have to use P4 at all.
Exactly. So if we can write that down, and then next time we meet, somebody could read out exactly that in better words than mine. And then if everybody agrees, then we can start, just keep going, right? With it. But it sounds like that, I mean, unless somebody's going to come up with a reason not to do it that way, then we should move towards that and, try to get the community just to say yes soon. That unless somebody has an alternative, then we need to keep moving forward. I'm not even hearing alternatives other than to go completely proprietary and not have any tools to use from the industry.
Yeah, so definitely we'll write it down and we'll let Marian know what we're thinking, if he comes next week or if we can see him. Liat, could you give him a heads up if you see him or talk to him?
Sure, it's just out of the office today. I will
Of
talk with
course,
him.
yeah. Yeah, he has some stuff he needs to do, so no problem, no problem. It was great you participated last week.
Next week will happen, right? It's only the last 2 weeks of December.
That's what I was hoping for, yeah. I was hoping for next week.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we should be.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
And then I think a lot of people will be out for the last couple of December, like I mentioned. And, we will write all this down and send out the meeting notes as well, Gerald. So I just can't do both while I'm presenting. So
Yeah. I just want kind of a statement to put in front of people. And then so if people want to dispute it, it's fine. I want people to debate everything. But if there is no dispute, then let's not waste our time. Let's just move forward.
in fact, on the main page under the README, I could put like, this is our plan. And then anyone can comment that, nope, this isn't our plan, or, something different. So.
But this doesn't talk about the P&A or anything, right? That this is the old.
This doesn't right now, but I can change it. Like I said, once I get the clarifying statement, I can just write it down here so we can all see it.
Pick the people you need to help you, but we need to get it right so we don't have 3 more meetings on this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we should put the principles we talked about, maybe moving to revamping the P4 model to use the P&A and benefit from the IPDK, so that we can get started from the simulator. So I think that Marian, talk to Marian, Prince, and Chris could help you get that down on a piece of paper, and then if nobody disputes that, then we just move on.
Yeah, and
Hey,
I'm
Xing,
happy to.
I have a question on this, IPTK. What I heard is that, does it use the side headers that we're generating in the dash, or no?
Gohan, the plan is definitely to for IPDK to IPDK. The plan is definitely to be SCI compliant.
But which side?
And we
Which
want
side?
to. Yeah, and we want to support all the Dash APIs that are defined, and what we might define in the upcoming timeframe as well.
Because I think if I remember the PINS project, right? So the extension side APIs hasn't been, really getting approved by the side company. It's different from the Dash APIs, right? So side APIs.
Yeah, what is there in pins today is the support of plain already defined SCI APIs, but remote management of that using P4 and SDN constructs. And the same thing is, if we extend and the subset of the SCI APIs that we have in Sonic that are currently taken in the Dash side, those can still be used to generate using pins, right? I mean, those can still be managed through pins from the P4 program remotely managed. But underlying SCI API support, the southbound API support in the IPDK, there's definitely plan to implement that.
Reshma, that might be tricky, right? Dash API, what will be generated from the P4 behavioral model versus the PINS API, which is the underlay. So there will be 2 modules.
The Dash has the SI APIs, right? That has to be implemented in all of our IPU, SmartNIC hardware, right, in the industry, and definitely the plans to support that in the IPDK is there. The Dash SI APIs that have been taken, those will be implemented in IPDK. Is there any other question related to this? I
So
didn't
I'm
get the
not,
other part.
yeah, so I'm not clear that why we need to, so if IPDK is only for Dash, then Guhan, why we worry about the pins SI extension APIs?
That's right, yeah.
No,
Extension
we
APIs
should,
not
right?
there.
So I think that was maybe my question is because currently I think that because Rashma mentioned the pins, right? So my understanding is that pins currently is not using the side dash APIs. Therefore, my question, right? So really, if we use IPTK, how could we get those dash API to be implemented by the IPTK, and then Sonic Stack can work on top of those APIs, right? So that's my question.
The one clarification here is that from pin side, we're only talking about the standard SI API support that is already been upstream right now.
Yeah.
Not the extensions, Gohan. Not the SI extensions. The part that is already in, right, as of right now, in pins, that manages the SI objects remotely. That's the part we're talking about only, not the SI extension that is not yet in.
Yeah. So that's right. So therefore, those extension APIs hasn't been, defined, right? So it hasn't been really, implemented by pins. Therefore, my question is, right? So, if we're defining the Dash APIs, and how would the integration, be used for the Dash project for the IPTK, right? So
There could be two different things. One could be the APIs that are not currently defined in SI, how to implement that using the SI extensions in pins, right? And that we can talk separately because that part is not yet there, right? And once it is there, that could be used from pins level as well. I think this is very deep into pins, but for this audience here. But the part that I was discussing was just to use the P4 program from the user side to define, to manage the SI objects that are already defined, and use that with P4DPDK as a soft switch, which is already PNA compliant. That is something for the future. Of course, Mario and Marianne both are already working on the BMV2 at this moment, and so for the soft switch part, we can use P4DPDK, we can use DPDK and pins together, which is already PNA compliant. If the P4DPDK is PNA compliant, then if we use pins Sonic with that, then we can manage the soft switch and have the user P4 written in the PNA.
No, but I think if I remember correctly, I think based on the community discussion, I think what we have been doing is that we're defining this side dash APIs, right? So which is going to be implemented by all the this NICs and DPUs, right? So then and on top of that, right? So it's I don't think that the current plan is to use pins to drive down through the northbound, right? So we said that we're going to have our management, our containers, our northbound containers will be GMI based, and then get those commands and then call those dash APIs to get them into the into the DPUs, right? So I'm not sure how the
Can I kind of paraphrase what I think you're saying? That if we have a soft switch implementation of the dash P4 pipeline, there should be a libsci on top of it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Regardless of the implementation below?
Yeah.
Is that what you're wanting to hear? So that you could interface that to Sonic or to simulation environment or whatever. It has libsci on top of it, regardless of what's underneath.
Yes. Yes.
And pins is kind of a interesting side note, but you really are interested in the SCI interface.
Yeah, but I think the point I want to make is that pins, it doesn't use that the dash interface, right? So therefore, I think I just want to get clarity on that. When we use this this P4 DBDK, we still need a side that provides the dash API implementations, right? So on top of that, we'll have the Sonic stack to provide the northbound APIs, right? So
yes, I agree with
from
that.
a Sonic integration standpoint, that makes sense. To integrate the soft switch with Sonic, that makes sense, and it'd be nice to have that full software simulation. But from a standpoint of exercising the behavioral model for correctness and to have a reference architecture, we could still use P4 runtime just from the standpoint of purely testing the data plane and not worrying about Sonic stack per se, right? That would still be a useful potential integration point.
I'm not so sure about that, because I think you still need to control from the SCI interface, right? So if you're, I think the purpose here is really to, we develop the test case, right? So those test cases will be based on the dash API, right? So it will not be based on the P4, runtime API to do, because we never assume that all the vendors will use P4 implementation, therefore we'll have a P4 APIs to expose, right? So therefore, if your purpose is to, okay, so let's develop the those test cases based on the dash APIs, and then validate the packet behavior. I'm not so sure how useful is that we change.
Gohan,
Yeah,
you made a good point. I mean, we cannot use the P4 runtime APIs. It inherently makes an assumption that there is a P4 info, right? So we cannot.
Yeah.
No, sorry, I
Why
disagree on
wouldn't
that.
there be a P4 info if you have a
Because
P4 behavioral model?
yeah,
Well,
exactly. If you have a P4 behavioral model, why? What's the point? I mean, we have a P4
I
behavioral
think
model. That P4
both,
runtime will only program a P4 behavioral model.
I think
But
both
the
of you are basically talking about the same thing, guys. I think what's happening is that what Gohan is coming from the angle is about basically for the hardware. For Gohan and Jay basically saying that in regular hardware, you can't just use P4 runtime. Eventually P4 runtime call needs to be translated into something which eventually called the SCI API, and then it runs it, because this is eventually the dash model. It's all SCI APIs.
If I can paraphrase, Microsoft cares about the SCI APIs only. If there's P4 info and P4 runtime underneath in the implementation, that's an implementation detail that they don't ever want to see or care about.
Correct. Yeah, it should remain under the dash SCI API, not on top of dash SCI API. Okay, if it need to be present.
Sure, but I'll just point out, if we build a P4 pipeline and want to run it and test it, it would be nice to be able to have some level of testing at the native P4 level of the model and not put the side translation layer on top of that, because that's just yet one more big pile of stuff to integrate and test.
But that's what Microsoft wants to consume, and that's what the compliance test is partly testing, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
API implementation part of it.
Yeah, but guys, if the eventual goal is to just do SCI API, then why are we even talking about compliance? Compliance to the P4. You can just basically deviate from P4. If eventually you generate the SCI API for whatever the tool that you have, and then you just write the SCI adapter and everything is done. The idea here is that you have to have a P4 code that is compliant of the PNA, so that you can create a behavior model and still test all your whatever the call you want to make through P4RT or eventually the behavior model outside of Psi, and not really bringing Psi in the picture for the testing purposes in the soft switch or the software model that you have. However, if you want to go eventually for the actual target, I agree that you have to have Psi, and then the P4RT will not actually suffice.
Yeah, Hanif, I mean, let me just make
I want to make
one comment. Gerald, I want to make one comment. I think there are two ways to look at it. Either you look the control plane from the P4RT point of view, or you look at the control plane interacting with the dash Psi API. What the point I think we are trying to understand, or at least I'm trying to make a point, that control plane interacting with a dash Psi API is the approach we want to take, because Sonic wants to consume the dash API. Now underneath the dash Psi API, you can very well have a P4RT. I don't have any problem with that. But does that make sense? Right? So
the problem with if you don't start from the beginning with the dash API and you start running tests for P4, then those tests are wasted, because then we have to rerun those tests with the Psi APIs on real hardware. We have real hardware today to test against.
Correct.
We have, and so running one effort to do testing for P4 and then only having to redo all the efforts to do it under Psi doesn't make sense to me. Like you're wasting cycles. In the end, we could start testing hardware today if somebody implements the behavioral model, we could start testing it today. But if you start, going, say, well, we're going to build a software simulator and we're going to test it with P4 APIs, then it doesn't help the final effort, which is we need a standard suite of tests that we run against all hardware. The software mechanism is how we get ready for the hardware. It's like, okay, I can generate all these software images and we can practice on that, and we can make sure that all works, so that when we go test the hardware, we have the full test suite and it's already tested, and so we know at least the suite works, and now we're testing hardware. But you don't want to go through these stages.
Yeah, we are in agreement. So I'm also saying the same thing. So my question, I'm going to replay the question. So what's the role of P4RT here?
It's an implementation detail for the reference model. That's it.
That's it. But who is the consumer of P4RT APIs?
The reference, some internal reference model code that converts Psi APIs to P4 runtime calls.
Yeah.
Well, let me just suppose, let's say Intel says, here you go, community. We've got a nice DPDK implementation of the Sirius.P4, all compliant to PNA. Works, it's great. What are we going to do with that?
Somebody in this group is going to sign up to write the conversion code from Psi APIs to those P4 runtime API calls. I don't know who.
Yes.
And so we can't pretend P4 runtime isn't there.
There is P4 sorry, just the pins. So basically, we want to be able to use the current Sonic as is with the P4 DPDK, right? And then create a soft switch out of it.
If the current Sonic doesn't have the dash APIs, it's useless for these referenced model tests.
Yeah, and then the pins model that we are referring to, it's a different way of actually doing it. It actually translates from P4RT to Psi,
yes,
as opposed to Psi to P4RT. So it's actually a reverse model.
Yeah, we need P4RT to Psi and use
Exactly.
the Psi to test the hardware and the soft switch both. So
yeah, but I think what Andy is basically saying here, which actually makes a lot of sense, is that you have dash APIs and then you encapsulate everything and then you make P4RT calls from the dash APIs. And that actually is going to be the mantra. And then I agree that, okay, this gives you a single model for us to really test both software and hardware, right? So
I should say that my opinions here, my belief here is based upon the belief, and Microsoft folks can correct me if I'm wrong, they only care about dash APIs at the top level and Psi APIs at the top level. Everything else is implementation detail to them. If that's wrong, someone at Microsoft, please correct.
It's wrong in a way that people have also agreed on the contrary, that the behavior model would be described through P4. That's why this is a little bit mixed up. And so you have both things being true. The behavioral model is being written in P4, and at the same time, we want to not be dependent on P4 for the actual implementation, so everything will be below Psi. Those two things are true, and that's why people are trying to rectify those two things, because they're both true.
But
Yeah.
you also,
Model
Microsoft doesn't
with
care if
P4.
the reference model for the data plane were implemented in C, for example, that as long as we did it, you don't care. If it's C or P4 or assembly, it doesn't really matter to you, right?
I think we're going to
but
want some P4 test cases. Otherwise, how will know the model works at its core? I mean, how do you know the P4 code is right? Someone makes one error in the P4 code. You want to find that break in Psi level or down at the model level? It's just a hypothetical question.
But that's a means to an end, right? I mean, you can actually have the same thing
Yeah.
with C, and then it just means to an end. But if the purpose is not to basically define actually the model that people can take and then build the hardware which targets it, right? Then I think what Andy is saying is that it could be any language. It doesn't really matter. Right?
P4 might be a convenient language choice and a good choice, but it's an implementation detail for the reference model.
Yeah, no bias here, Andy, right?
But it does require that somebody go off and write the translation between Psi and the P4 calls up. That's what it. There's work involved with that, and that's what people have to agree on.
Yeah, and if that's the case, and no one's interested in having the P4 model in this diagram, if we could leave this slide deck here up, it sounds to me like people are saying we're not interested in doing this set of tests down here with the P4 model. What we want is just to treat the DPDK implementation as a virtual version of that DUT on the lower right. It's got Psi interface. We have a version that's virtual. We have a version that's physical, and this thing in the lower left is not of interest. Is that what we're saying?
It's an implementation detail. What's inside that box in the reference model? Outside the dash API, at the dash API layer down, it's an implementation detail, right?
Okay.
I think that's what Microsoft wants.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think when it comes time to actually building this stuff and building test cases and debugging, someone's going to have to get down to the P4 level.
Yep.
It's working. It's working.
However the reference model is implemented, somebody will need to debug that, and there could be bugs in the side to P4 runtime translation layer code.
And will we need a standard community test that proves that the P4 implementation is correct, or just only look at the Psi implementation? That's kind of my question.
I mean, I think Gerald was mentioning somebody writing fuzz tests on the reference model. If they've got Psi dash APIs and packets in and packets out, they can write tests at that level and not care that it's in P4.
That's correct. And we will run fuzzing, and we will run all the regular ICMP and all the tests. But it will be all. We don't want to waste time doing this twice. It should be done at the Psi level and the packet level.
Okay.
Yeah, and it doesn't even, just like you said, it's implementation specific. It doesn't mean that somebody can't write a test suite for their P4 model. If they want to do that, then they'll do that. It's just that this group's not going to be dealing with that.
So it sounds like there's a lot of information on the call to collate, put out, and talk about next time. I don't know that we came to a conclusion here.
Yeah, I think the P&A thing that we talked about before, is that affect the conversation of changing the P4 model to only use the P&A constructs as opposed to the proprietary that we have today? Does what we're talking about now even affect that conversation?
Well, maybe.
Or do people still agree that we should make the model adhere to the P&A?
I think the last part of the conversation doesn't impact the first part. I think that
Right.
we should still go.
I didn't think
and
so
make...
either. So let's do both then. So we need to write that down to see if Gohan, Prince, everybody, Marianne, you guys agree on that. And then the second thing is what we're talking about right now, which is always stimulating all tests from the Psi, not lower layers.
Okay, are you all agreeable to wrap it up? Does anyone else have 10 a.m. calls they need to get to?
I think we made good accomplishments here.
Okay, Chris, I'm gonna have to schedule time with you on my own later.
Yeah, we can unravel this.
Okay, guys, I appreciate the brain power and the call. Thank you so much for coming. It sounds like we have some things to talk about next week as well. I will try to basically put together what we've talked about and put it out in a way. I'll put it out in meeting notes and also put it on the front page of the GitHub repo. So give me a day or so. And if you don't mind, I'd like to release you all for your next call. Does that work for you all? Yes?
Yeah. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Bye,
Okay.
everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.